All right, so in this video, we're going to just quickly wrap up what we were doing in the previous video with the revolution of 1830. My mistake was to try to cram in too much stuff into that video, and I didn't quite get to the epilogue to the story. So this is the very brief epilogue to the revolution of 1830. And so this is going to be the rebellion of 1832. So here's what ends up happening after 1830. So if you remember, the rich liberals, who were mostly bankers, and the urban middle class, who were mostly journalists and doctors and teachers and lawyers, joined with the urban working class, and these guys are like workers. They are the printers and the laborers and, a few factory workers, even though there aren't a whole lot of factory workers in Paris at the time, but people who do manual labor. So you've got the rich people, the urban middle class, and the urban working class. And if you remember last time, they all had their own reasons for wanting Charles to go. So remember, the rich bankers didn't like that Charles wasn't consulting them when he passed the four ordinances. The urban middle class had just lost their right to vote, and the urban working class had they just lost their job because Charles abolished freedom of the press. So they all had their own different reasons for wanting Charles to go. So they all united to overthrow Charles and replace him with his first cousin, Louis Philippe. And so Louis Philippe now becomes Louis Philippe the First, King of the French. And remember that he is the King of the French, not King of France, indicating that he acknowledges that the people gave him this power. And so, under Louis Philippe, who I will just call LP because it's easier to write than Louis Philippe. So under Louis Philippe, France now operates as a real constitutional monarchy. So pretty much following the same pattern as what we've seen in Great Britain, except it took the French another 140 years to get to this point. So France now operates as a real constitutional monarchy, very similar to what we would see in the United Kingdom. Now, as we know, in the United Kingdom, for centuries, in these style of constitutional monarchies, the rich people, and now the middle class, are favored. That's how it's always been. At first, it was the rich people, and as liberals started to get more money and more influence, they gain a political voice too. But the rich people are now favored. But remember, the rich people and the middle class people couldn't overthrow Charles alone. All of the working class people understood that Charles would still be there had it not been for their work. Right? Because these are the guys were actually fighting the French military. These are the people that were fighting on the barricades. And it was what they were doing that was just as important in getting rid of Charles as whatever the rich liberals and the urban middle class were doing. The problem here is that Louis Philippe was a liberal and supported liberal ideas. He was not a Democrat. He did not care about giving the poor people, the working class, any sort of political rights. So, in 1832, the working class tried to repeat the events of 1830. So they set up the barricades. They call a general strike where nobody goes to work. And they're going to try to overthrow Louis Philippe in the same way that they had just gotten rid of Charles. This time, however, the rich people and the middle class don't help. Why not? Because they like Louis Philippe. They like what Louis Philippe is doing. He's listening to them. So we don't want to get rid of him. He's doing exactly what we want. And so this rebellion in 1832 gets squashed by the army. This is what we're going to see play out. This pattern will play out in 1848 all across Europe. So what we're seeing in France in 1830 and in 1832 is going to happen all across Europe in 1848. So different interests, so different groups will align with a common purpose. Get rid of the current political system. So get rid of the conservative monarchs. Just like what happened in 1830, we're going to see this all across Europe in 1848. So we're going to see it happen again in France. We'll see it in the Germanys. We'll see it in Austria. We'll see it in Italy. This will happen all across Europe. And then, just like in 1832, once they've achieved their goal, they will turn on each other. Because they don't have the same overall goal. They have a common purpose, which is to get rid of the conservative monarch. But rich liberals and working class people don't have the same end goal. So once they've gotten rid of the monarchs, it'll be liberals versus radicals and socialists. And not to get too far ahead of ourselves, when these two groups start fighting each other, the result will be the conservatives come back and pick off their opponents one by one. So that's what we will see when we start talking about 1848. So we'll talk about this pattern happen all throughout Europe. Now there is one little side note to this. So an eyewitness to what happened in 1832 was the very famous author Victor Hugo. So Victor Hugo, who wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Les Miserables, saw this firsthand. He was in Paris when the rebellion of 1832 happened. And he made the rebellion the centerpiece of his novel Les Miserables, and it became the musical and the play that everybody loves now, but it was at the time a primary source. So Les Mis is actually one of the only primary sources we have for what happened in 1832. And if it hadn't been for Victor Hugo's notes and what he put into his novel, 1832 probably would have been just forgotten about. It would have been a little footnote in history. But because he wrote about it, and it became such a popular novel and then musical, we have a better understanding of the historical processes that happened leading up to 1848. So we can thank Victor Hugo for a lot of what we just did. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. This was just a short epilogue to the story of 1830. In our next set of videos, we'll start talking about what happens in 1848. So we'll do a little bit of background on the areas that we're going to pay attention to in 1848. So until then, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.